Powered by Red Media in partnership with TSN, Season 6 of the Ray and Dregs Hockey Podcast. It is presented by our title sponsor, Tim Hortons. Hey, Roll Up the Rim to Win is back, and it's back through March 23rd. You can play for a chance to win tens of millions of prizes, including the electric Volkswagen ID Buzz, ATVs, there's vacations, electronics, of course, gift cards, Tim's products, and so much more. Tim's Rewards members earn one digital roll with each eligible purchase of select drinks, breakfast, or meal items. Plus, while supplies last, guests can also receive roll-up to win hot beverage cups with a roll to reveal under the rim. Trade deadline day, my friend, March 7th. This is a Friday evening, Ray. You're on the road. I just got back. I mean, typical nonsense on deadline day. You know, trade breaking analysis. That was all wrapped into Studio Mayhem. Special guests at TSN headquarters. We had Mark Giordano, formerly of the Toronto Maple Leafs, in studio. Obviously, there's always tons of food and lots of laughs, but did you miss it? Like you haven't been in that kind of amped up environment for a while because you're a full-scale analyst, travel analyst. Well, you dabble in the studio, but you didn't miss it, I'm thinking.
You know what I missed? I would have missed, I think, as I think about it, is that, you know, the 12:30 to 2:30, 3 o'clock range, like when it's all hitting. But that's when your prep that you do or don't do shows, like for us, for the analysts.
Oh, yeah.
So I miss that part. I did not miss sitting there, you know, getting into studio at 7 o'clock and sitting there all day. I was following along. I have an off day in Tampa. I had the Sabres in Tampa Thursday night, and I've got Boston, whatever they're going to look like tomorrow, and Tampa at 3:30 tomorrow afternoon. So today I just followed along. I sat by the pool. I had a coffee. I relaxed. So while you guys were grinding away, it was an interesting day to follow. I will say that. It felt like more complicated, bigger trades this year. Yeah. Not just the Rantanen one, but like all of it. It just felt like a little more involved than 26 little trades. That's what it felt like anyway.
Okay, well, let's get into all of that in Tim Hortons headlines. And this isn't an emergency pod. This is our second scheduled pod of the week, but it is reactionary. And of course, we're looking for the analysis of so many deals that went down. But, you know, I can tell you just from following all of the stories coming in particular, the Rantanen trade first from Colorado to Carolina. And then, you know, when it became evident he was again going to leave and be traded by the Carolina Hurricanes, it became less in the day about the quantity, the number of trades, and more about, and this was fun for me, you know, just collecting the opinions and the information as to why things were unfolding, right? So you're right. Let's start with the Rantanen trade from Carolina to Dallas. So the Canes get Logan Stankoven, a pretty good young player, one of the core young pieces of the Dallas Stars, former Kamloops Blazer, which would hurt the feelings of Tom Gaglardi, the owner of the Dallas Stars and, of course, the Kamloops Blazers, but he wants to win the cup. Conditional first in 2026, a conditional first in 2028, third in 26, and a third in 27. Now, just to reset the table. So when I get in this morning, I get a call effectively from the players' side saying, okay, just a reminder that the deal between Dallas and Carolina is conditional on the extension that Dallas has to negotiate with Mikko Rantanen. That extension has not been negotiated. It's nowhere. So there is no deal. There's no trade. And at that point, they thought that Carolina was going to continue, and Carolina did to some degree consider some of the other interests, some of the other options. And a lot of that, Ray, it's gonna percolate here in the days ahead, hours ahead, maybe, in speculation. Okay, well, what was Toronto really willing to give up player X? Did Carolina really ask for Matthew Nyes as part of the deal for me? You know, that kind of stuff, right? So then I'm sitting on set, and I get a call. Let's just say from the Dallas Stars. And the point was made to me okay, the player wants 13 million. We're not going a penny over 12. So that's where it is. If he doesn't come back down to 12, we'll move on. That's just the way it is. Obviously, Mikko Rantanen had the other options being considered. Maybe there weren't any that he could move on. Probably thought that, Dallas is a long-term fit. And with their taxation, 12 schmil times 8 with a no-move clause on a team that is going to contend for the Stanley Cup for the foreseeable future, not a bad deal. Not a bad deal. So, okay, your take on, first of all, Carolina not getting the security from Colorado that they needed, right? Mm-hmm. In getting Rantanen extended first, and then Dallas swooping in and effectively landing the best player.
Well, there are plans and then there are execution. And sometimes the best plans are, they're put into motion and then the execution just doesn't quite get over the finish line. So that's what I would say the Colorado-Carolina trade was. The plan was there.
Yeah.
But the execution of getting Rantanen into a contract clearly did not happen. So I'm never really sure how much a team can reach out and try and work a back door to say, hey, is he going to at least be interested in signing here? But because it's critical to that deal.
Yeah, you need permission by the letter of the law.
Yeah,
right?
But everybody's got a friend of a friend. And
fair.
And so
it happens every July 1st.
Yeah, so so in my mind, that was a bit of a bogey that they didn't have a good feel or they were hoping that they could get it done because they traded away a pretty good asset for sure in Martin Necas. So now it doesn't work and you do the best you can in a lousy spot to recoup as many assets as you can. And so whether there was a Toronto part to this or not, or a somebody else part to this, the team will take, this is what fans don't get. The teams don't say, oh, that's a better deal. I want to take the lousy deal. Yeah. They do the best they can with it because they got to put it together on the fly. They don't get to take their time with it, right? Like now the minutes are squeezing in. So they get the trade grouping from Dallas. Carolina's worse today than they were before the Colorado trade.
Right.
They're not as good a team.
Agreed.
In the future, I don't know. This is what I will say, because I said it on the broadcast last night about the Tampa Bay trading many of their first rounders away. The 2027 first rounder that Tampa traded to Seattle, that kid is 15 years old right now. Just think about that in the NHL context. He's 15. That conditional 28th that Carolina got, he's 14. He's a bantam player. They don't give a damn about that. They're like, we'll figure that out later. Now, for Carolina, these become assets that go into the pot that they can try to use later on. Because the guy you draft in 2028 is going to be ready in 2033 to be an impact player.
Right.
That's somebody else's problem. So I do think Dallas ended up with a hell of a player that's going to fit better in a system in Dallas, I think, than he would have in the go system of Carolina.
Okay.
So that's Carolina or Dallas better for sure. Carolina worse today, asset heavy for the future. By the time Colorado with the other team in this whole thing got through it today, better team. Much better team. Yeah. And so those are all moving parts around one player, really, when you think of it.
Yeah. Do you want to stick in the West or do you want to go over to the Toronto Maple Leafs? You mentioned Colorado.
Yeah, let's do Colorado quick here,
It makes sense. And maybe we can lump the Oilers into this just out of respect to Game 7 of the Stanley Cup Final. Because Edmonton does acquire Trent Frederick, who's going to be a while with the high ankle. They get Wallman, right?
Yep.
A defenseman from the San Jose Sharks. So there's improvement with the Edmonton Oilers. But holy smokes, what about Colorado? I mean, they bring in Brock Nelson from the New York Islanders, which there's a bit of a backstory here, okay? Now, Toronto and Winnipeg were just keen after Brock Nelson. I mean, for Winnipeg, he'd have been a perfect two-center. He really would have been. And I don't know, like I know that Toronto made a significant offer. And I think the messaging that came back to both Brad Treliving and Kevin Cheveldayoff, was, he really doesn't want to come into Canada. And that was never their interpretation at any point throughout this negotiation. Well, just to be fully transparent, I mean, Winnipeg may have been on Brock Nelson's no move, but he would have gone to Winnipeg. But Colorado was his first choice, right? I mean, when you have no trade protection,
that's what it's
and he
for,
identified,
man.
That's what it's for. So Brock Nelson says, I want to go to Colorado. Lou Lamoriello works out a deal with Colorado. Brock Nelson ends up in Colorado. Okay. I mean, maybe that could have been conveyed to Toronto and Winnipeg along the way. It doesn't matter. So I'm just painting that picture. So Colorado gets Nelson. They get Charlie Coyle. Earlier, they've got Ryan Lindgren. I mean, you can go back early in the year. They rebuild their goaltending. Yeah. I mean, this Colorado team, this Dallas team, the Vegas Golden Knights, I think, are loaded too. The Oilers, any team in the West now all of a sudden has a problem based on what we've seen of late here.
Yeah, okay. So here's what I'm going to say about Colorado. And this is a view that is widely held. I hear it from lots of media people. And I think it's I think it's as silly a fable as there is. Don't trade in your division. Who gives a damn? And a general manager, more than one, has told me this. I'm not worried about those 4 games against my division opponent. I'm worried about the other 78. So let's say Colorado decided, oh my God, I can't trade in the division. I can't trade Rantanen in the division. I'm going to trade him to Carolina. 3 weeks later, he ends up as their first round opponent, probably. Right? Like, you can't control that.
No.
You as a manager, and I've never been one, but you must look at the best deal possible. If you trade him to the next door neighbor, who cares? If you make your team better, that's all you can worry about. The West is all of a sudden, it was going to be a beastly road out of the West anyway, and it sure as heck is now. I mean, let's not forget, and I think this goes for a few teams. We look at the deadline. I'm sure there's going to be winners and losers lists that come out. The previous 3 weeks, while they're not the deadline, they kind of were the deadline. I felt we talked a lot. You can go back and find it, but I felt there were 2 deadlines this year, before the 4 Nations and today. And some teams did a lot of their heavy lifting prior.
Yeah, I agree.
And then they got to here, and I'm sure everybody wants to make a move if they can. And sometimes it pops up and sometimes it doesn't. But I think Colorado with McKinnon and Nelson and Coyle and Drury, that's a pretty good center ice position.
Pretty solid.
I like their middle of the ice. I like their goaltending. I didn't like either of them at the start of the year. Like it was too top heavy up front. So I think they're a deeper, stronger team. Man, the Jets were a good team. If they didn't add anybody, the Jets were a good team.
Yeah.
Anyway, there's a couple of deals that I don't quite get my head around. Like, how did Luke Schenn become valuable as a 2nd round pick?
Well, I'll tell you. So that's interesting to me.
It's amazing to me. So Nashville made that trade with Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
And they got Michael Bunting. Like, why?
Tommy Novak.
Yeah. So they traded a center that they don't really have lots of to Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
Why didn't they just not make that trade and trade Schenn to Winnipeg for a second? Dregs better than me. It's timing. It's the way the day shuffles out, and all of a sudden we got assets. We want to be better. Luke Schenn can help us. It's a 2nd round pick, and that's right. Like there's really not much more complication than that. I don't think, other than the timing, is there?
Well, no, and look, there are always two sides to every story. I believe that Winnipeg thought they were closing in on a deal with Luke Schenn when he was with Nashville, and then all of a sudden, poof, he's gone,
Right.
and he gets shockingly traded, as you've described, to the Pittsburgh Penguins. And for Cheveldayoff, I mean, he had his line in the water on lots of players, and we'll have this conversation for another day. The general managers meetings are coming up around the corner, and I think for the most part, we're a player-friendly podcast. I think we are.
Yep.
We try to be, right? But there is a conversation to be had about limiting the number of no trade clauses or no move clauses, or putting some form of restrictions on, I don't know, the hierarchy financially of the player that can demand that, or
okay, I'm going to disagree. And I'm going to disagree because I'm going to say that's the manager's problem.
Right.
Don't hand them out like candy. They built their own problem. There was a time that only the very best players had no trade protection. And they just went, "Oh, we need that player. Yeah, we'll give you no trade."
Yeah.
Crazy. Like, don't give it out.
Crazy.
Don't give it out.
No, but what to me, and you're bang
do they need
on,
to be protected again? They already got a salary cap.
Yeah.
Well,
and you're right. It's not like the National Hockey League, is trying to encourage teams give out no trade. Why would you block yourself in? Like, why would you?
I don't get it. I don't.
In defense of Winnipeg, and we can appreciate, okay, the city of Winnipeg, a small city, a small market, they're the best team in the National Hockey League right now. And there are players out there, Ray, with trade protection, a no trade list of 5 teams or fewer, and Winnipeg is on their no trade list. And it's not funny if you're Kevin Cheveldayoff and the Winnipeg Jets. So that's how they have to then, so they don't get Luke Schenn with the first swing. Right. And, Alexiak didn't get moved, but I don't think he would have gone to Winnipeg, and Carlo probably wouldn't have gone to Winnipeg, and this defenseman wouldn't have gone to Winnipeg. Right. So you have no choice but to overpay, to go back to Kyle Dubas in Pittsburgh and say, okay, what is it going to take to get Luke out of Winnipeg? Right? Or out of Pittsburgh, sorry.
But just think what can be done there? Oh, I'm sorry, 8 players or 80 players already have a city on their no trade. You can't have 81. Like,
no, you can't.
You can't. I mean, it makes it is challenging, I'm sure. And I'm sure it's frustrating as all heck.
Yeah. So, again, Cheveldayoff goes, we'll dive to the West, because it's impossible to overlook Winnipeg as a top team in the league, let alone in the Western Conference.
Right.
So they do add Luke Schenn, and they add Brandon Tanev.
Yep.
And there was a high level of disappointment over the whole Brock Nelson saga, because that was what Cheveldayoff identified as his most pressing need, a number 2 center. It's not like they're entirely weak up the middle of the ice. They're not. But a 2C would have really kind of give them that pop. But they add the grit and the character and the game that Brandon Tanev brings, and Luke Schenn. No, I mean, it's an okay.
They've got 90 deadline, points.
I think it's fine.
Right. So here's the thing. If you went around the league and how many teams were looking for a center, for example, or how many were looking for a defenseman, it doesn't take very long to cross-reference and go, oh, there's a lot of teams looking for the same guy.
Yeah.
Right. And there's just not an endless supply of players that are available.
Yeah.
In the position and the time that you need them.
Yeah. Did Edmonton miss? I know we kind of briefly glossed over it. I mean, Bowman, now we know Evander Kane is done for the year.
Right.
And Stan would have had that information in acquiring Wallman, I'm pretty sure. But did he need to do more?
Well, I'm going to say yes, and I'm assuming he tried. I look at their team, and man, Leon Draisaitl is having an amazing season, and he's rarely on the ice 5-on-5 with a player that should be with him.
Right.
So I would have thought one more forward would have been really, really something. So you can say why weren't they poking around on some of these other forwards? I'm sure they were.
Mm-hmm.
Anthony
For sure
Anthony
were. Yeah.
Beauvillier went for a second-round pick. Right? So, like, if that's what a second-round pick gets you, what do you got to play to? What do you have to pay to get a difference maker?
Right.
And I know they said, well, you can't waste another year of McDavid. I get all that stuff, but eventually, there has to be somebody on the other side that has the player that you want, that wants what you have to offer. It's not you can start blowing out first round picks, and I think certain teams should do it. I really quite admire what Julien Brisebois does in Tampa. And
just win, do what it takes.
And he had a great quote. He said, I'd rather have a lot of good players as opposed to a lot of draft picks. But here's the one thing I will say about Tampa. And again, I was working the game last night, so I had some time to think about this. The moves that they make year after year, in my mind, are a result of a couple of things. One is courage to blow the first rounders out, like to move them out way into the future. The second is Julien Brisebois clearly has full support and green light from ownership. He does not worry about his job security.
No.
Because you cannot manage if you're worried about your job. And the best teams don't change direction every 3 years. Look, Steve Yzerman, Julien Brisebois, they've been here for that combination for well over a decade. John Cooper's in his 13th year. If you're worried about your job, you can't do it in a fashion that they do it. And so I would say if I'm in the top 8 teams of the league, how often are you going to be there? I think that's where those are the teams that need to say, there's no point keeping the powder dry.
Yeah. All right. We'll wrap up the West with, again, just a real brief thought on Vancouver, because we have to get to Toronto, Ottawa, and Boston. And you reference Anthony Beauvillier, with all due respect. So he draws a second-round pick, and the Vancouver Canucks couldn't get anything that mattered, frankly, for Brock Boeser.
Yeah.
You know, and there's talk of maybe there was some gestures toward an extension. I mean, I don't get the sense in working with the contacts that I do on both sides of that I mean, there's rumors of a 6-year extension. I don't see that happening. Just again, now let's see what happens with Brock Boeser in this playoff push and all that. But even as and this isn't a shot at the Vancouver Canucks. I mean, again, you put players out there, and if teams are interested, they're going to gather, and you'll make a deal or you won't. You have a decision to make. The decision for Vancouver was an easy one. There wasn't enough interest in Boeser. Does that surprise you at all, just based on some of the other names and the level of player that, earned a second-round pick, a draft pick, whatever?
Okay, so here's another thing. I was just going to say this, and I'm going to pull it back. I was going to say, with all due respect for Anthony Beauvillier, if I had a choice to add Brock Boeser for a second or Beauvillier, I would have taken Boeser. However, Boeser makes $6.6 million. Maybe
it's a tough one.
Maybe they didn't have cap room. Maybe they wanted a left shot, not a right shot. I don't know. I mean, I'm surprised, I guess, that there was no deal that came together. But as I said earlier, because they have cap space.
Yes.
So what I said earlier is sometimes the plan is there, but to execute it, you need help.
Yeah.
And nobody really is helping you. They just have something that you might take. Like, if you're going to trade Brock Boeser for, I don't know, I didn't even know what were the offers out there. Was it? Do you even know? Like, pretty clear.
I don't, but it just told the response I kept getting not very good.
So I mean, instead of doing that, why not wait till the summer and before the draft? If somebody wants to make a trade if you don't want to sign them and you make a trade and get a 3rd round pick at the draft, well,
fine.
Maybe that's the best you can do. I don't know. The Canucks also, don't forget, in the last 3 weeks, they got Marcus Pettersson and O'Connor and Hedl signed. Hedl and O'Connor, or O'Connor and Pettersson are signed to extensions.
Yeah.
Hedl's got 2 years left. I mean, maybe they view that as,
and I think they do,
as that's their, that's the movement that they made. Right.
Yeah, and no different than your point earlier about the 2 deadlines. The one that happened before the Four Nations, where teams got stuff done. Yeah. So it's not like Vancouver's been sitting idle. I mean, it's
two guys to keep an eye on here. Washington, we talked about, they added Beauvillier, but they got a really good player in Ryan Leonard that they saved some cap space for, so they weren't going to use up all of their cap space. They're like, Ryan Leonard's ready to play pro.
He's going to be fun to watch.
Yeah, that kid's a pro already. The Canucks have Tom Willander coming. And so there goes some of your cap space again. So it's way more complicated than a guy like me thinks. You're more in touch with it. But when I hear a lot, well, they should just do this. They've probably thought of that. All these managers, they're not sitting there with their head in the dark. I mean, some are better at it than others. There's no question.
So Toronto fans, Ottawa fans, Boston fans will say you guys buried the lead in this edition of Ray and Driggs. So let's go to the Leafs. You know what? Strategic and well executed work, I think, by the Toronto Maple Leafs in acquiring Scott Laughton. They needed a third line center. They get that. Hardworking, physical guy. Brandon Carlo, for me, is an absolute steal. Now, you didn't get those players for nothing. Again, I appreciate the first-round draft picks that are going out. Fraser Minten, as described to me by somebody I trust with the Toronto Maple Leafs, Fraser Minten, in a couple, 3 years, 4 years, is going to be what Scott Laughton is today. That's how Toronto viewed Fraser Minten. But Toronto wants to win now, obviously, right? So now you bring Brandon Carlo in, and Craig Berube is like, okay, am I going to play him with Morgan Riley? Am I going to slot him with OEL? Like your top 4 looks pretty good all of a sudden, doesn't it? With Brandon Carlo in it?
It does. Now, again, I don't know how much people watch or get to watch. I do a lot of Bruins games. I've seen Brandon Carlo play a ton in the last 4 years. And what he is a defender. He's a penalty killer. He's not super physical. He defends with his stick and his size really well, if that makes sense. He's not like, you're not going to be a crash and banger, but he is.
No.
So if now the right side of your defense includes Tanev and Carlo, you're pretty well covered. So when I see a deal like that, what I think is, okay, Riley has to play at a level that they need him to play at. Or it doesn't matter that you got Brandon Carlo, I guess is my point. It's like, it's like no matter what the Canucks do, if Elias Pettersson doesn't play, they're sunk. Right? There gets to a point you fill your team in, and then your big boys really have to carry the day. But I like the additions in particular because they're trying to play a certain way in Toronto. And it seems they've hit a speed wobble lately, right? There's
a little bit.
Carlo and Laughton, they're no ego, no fuss players who excel on the defensive side of the game more than the offensive side of the game. And I think that's really positive for the way the Leafs are trying to execute Craig Berube's plan of how they want to play. So I thought they had a really good day today. Look, man, the first Minten, they're expensive assets. But as we just said, if you're in the top 8 or so teams in the league, what are you waiting for? Like remember, one team's going to win.
Yeah.
And in the Atlantic Division, likely Toronto or Florida is going to get Tampa. That's no gimme in the first round. Dallas and Colorado might play in the first round. Are you kidding me? Like, there is going to be some real heavyweights again that get punted out, and they will have bought big at this deadline. That's just You can only do what you can do, and then you just hope your guys play well at the right time.
So you referenced the defending Stanley Cup champions, and that's obviously the Florida Panthers, but tidy work by Billy Zito in the last little bit. He pulls Seth Jones out of Chicago, works some stuff, gets him on a $7 million cap hit, roughly. I mean, terrific. Yeah. And then sneaks in and grabs Brad Marchand, who's hurt, okay? In fairness, he's going to be a while. But we just talked about Carlo. Now you've got Brad Marchand, who's property of the Florida Panthers. Going to add some juice to that lineup when he's healthy. You know that. Charlie Coyle goes to Colorado. Trent Frederick had been traded to the Edmonton Oilers. Justin Brazeau, I guess they didn't want to negotiate and extend either Frederick or Brazeau, obviously, because both these young guys got traded. Brazeau to Minnesota. We know which path that Cam Neely and the Boston Bruins are now going on, and it starts with an R word, Ray, and that's rebuild. You're not retooling on the fly here. It's bigger than that.
Yeah, it had to be hard for them because that organization doesn't and has not slid onto this path very frequently. But I think it's the right move for them. Eventually, the retirements of all their Stanley Cup guys that have, brought them so far for so many years, from Chara to Rask to Bergeron to Krejci. Like, you just don't wallpaper over that and don't miss a beat. So it caught up to them, and now they have to change the page. And I'm really happy I did not do any Boston prep for the game tomorrow because my game sheet would look like a 3-year-old's crayon all over it. Yeah. So I'm going to wait to put that together. In some cases, it's just inevitable, right? Like players get old, players get less effective, players are there. And then, like in Marchand's case, got 20 goals again, but they had a chance to pick up a really good asset. They go ahead and do that. And Florida's in win-win-win-win. Right? Oh, yeah. Just remember, 3 years ago, Florida won the President's Trophy. 2 years ago, they lost in the Stanley Cup final. Last year, they win the Stanley Cup. They're not fiddling around here. The window is wide open. And here's another thing I will say about Marchand. We will see the Bennett Marchand play 15,000 times in the next 4 days.
Yeah.
You would be really surprised how little the players care.
Is that right?
About that.
Yeah.
Like, I'm sure they'll have a chat. Like, they just played together. Right? They just played together. I'm sure they'll have a chat, and it's done. It's finished.
Yeah.
One of my favorite teammates of all time was Steve Thomas. He beat the living crap out of me one night in Toronto. Right when my glove hit the ice and he grabbed me, I'm like, oh my God, this guy's way stronger than me. And he just, like, I don't know, my line is midway through the fight, I realized he was a middleweight champ of the world. Like, when he came to our team, I'm like, it's just in the game.
Yeah.
It's for everybody else to discuss. And, like, what are you going to do? Be mad at him still? Like, it's over. It's done.
Yeah.
And so that stuff really doesn't matter to the player. Like, Marchand is going to be embraced.
Oh yeah,
he is going to stir some shite up 2 minutes into his first game, and they're going to love him. And they're not going to ask him to carry the team offensively. He's going to be a third line player and a second power play guy, and just another piece that they can put in. I mean, it's a good ad for a really good team.
All right. Why don't we wrap up the headlines and essentially this trade deadline version of the Ray and Riggs with the Ottawa Senators. And we kind of nibbled, we as a collective media, around Ottawa for the last couple of weeks because there was that undercurrent of speculation that Staios may have Norris in play. Maybe he's talking about this piece, but probably what's more likely is he does very little. Just depth pieces, gives his younger guys the opportunity to go through the fight of trying to earn a playoff spot, all of that. All right. We talked endlessly, again, collective media, about the possibilities in Buffalo. And was Dylan Cozens actually in play? Well, obviously he was in play, but true to his word, and I'll give Kevin Adams some credit, he said, I'm willing to shake things up. I will make a bold move as long as I'm getting players back, right? Not draft picks. He turned away first-round draft picks for Cozens, Byram, Alex Tuck, maybe Peterka, on and on it goes. Okay, so Dylan Cozens ends up in Ottawa, Dennis Gilbert, and a second-round pick in 2026, Josh Norris and Jacob Bernard-Docker, defenseman, go to the Buffalo Sabres. So just on its face, analyze that trade. It was an emotional day. Like we saw Brady Tkachuk essentially containing his emotion, basically tearing up because he and Josh Norris are super close buddies, right? But just on its face, is that enough for Dylan Cozens? And then conversely, did Steve Staios, did he land a real nice piece here based on what he gave up?
Okay, I think Josh Norris is a really good player. I think when I read some of the evaluations, I'm like, I don't see it the same way.
Yeah,
Norris can score. Norris has not been healthy.
Has some speed.
Yep,
right?
But there's a legit question about his health.
Yeah,
but I think Norris is by far a more instinctual offensive player. I think he's a better offensive player than Cozens.
Okay.
I think Cozens has lost his way a bit in Buffalo. I watched him last night, and it's certainly not an evaluation for all time. It's an evaluation of last night. And he just looked lost. It's like he doesn't know what he is. And 2 years ago, he scored 31 goals. He's not a 31-goal scorer. I think my fourth year, I got 41 goals. I never scored that again. And everybody has a high water mark. And I wonder offensively if that's Cozens, 31 goals. He should be able to be a 200-foot player. I think in a couple of years, he's going to be heavier and he's going to be able to have more of a physical impact than he does.
Yeah.
He's 180 pounds. Like he's pretty slight.
Right.
By all accounts, an 11 out of 10 as a kid. So as the Senators are building their team, maybe they look at that and think, we believe Cozens can be a more well-rounded center behind Stützle. Like maybe that's their view. But Buffalo got a better offensive player. I look at the Sabres and there's no shape or form to their team. Right? It's 18 guys wearing a blue jersey.
Yeah.
And that's really the challenge in Buffalo. For Ottawa, I mean they're close, right? They're like 5 teams sitting right around that wild card stuff. I don't know. Does the change immediately give Cozens a spark? Like it might.
It might. They need it.
They need him to be a more robust player than he certainly was last night, and that he has been over the last bit. And I wonder if like all this trade speculation, that's hard for a young guy. I wonder if it rattled him. There's so much to this that we look at names, we forget they're people, because the person, if he's not comfortable, he's not going to play well.
Right.
He's just not. So I actually think this is a trade, Dregs, that both teams might really like.
Perfect. It's the Billy Guerin trade.
Yeah, right. Don't wait for a winner. Wait for a good deal.
No. Fair for both sides. Yeah. We'll see if it plays out that way. All right. Those are your Tim Hortons headlines. Where are you? You're in Tampa Bay, correct?
I'm Tampa. I've got who do I? Oh, I already told you. I got Boston. I already forgot again. I got Boston tomorrow afternoon. I'm flying after the game. Get halfway home. Fly home Sunday morning, and get home for the first time since I think this one's been 13 days. So it's time to go. My clothes that are over there are screaming at me, do not put me on again. Do not do it. They've retreated into the suitcase on their own.
Is there a limit? Like, I mean, could you wear the same T-shirt? Not to work out, obviously, because you're sweating. But like, do you just wear it if you're going out for a quick dinner? Come home in the room, hang it up, wear it again 2 days later.
Dregs, I do have a saying. I hope you like this shirt because you're going to see it again tomorrow. I don't really care anymore. My whole goal travel wise, no packing, like no checked bags. If you have a checked bag, I will leave you behind. This is not the Marines.
It's a rule of travel.
Hey, I'm not the Marines. You will be there. Get your own Uber. I am out of here.
All right, buddy. Well, enjoy your limited time in Boston and get home safe.
All right, well, thank you, and go have a sip of something and relax.
Sip of something, and
put your
I'm
feet
not
up.
complaining.
Yeah, put your feet up. It's a busy day.
8 hours of sleep in the last 48.
Yep.
That's a push for me. I need a little bit of sleep, so I'm going to have a sip and a sleep.
Oh, that's a good one. That's a good one. Enjoy the weekend.
All right, buddy.
Everybody, thanks for listening, and we're into the stretch run now. So
yes,
best of luck to your teams. Thanks for listening, everybody.
Final push of the regular season. Thank you to our sponsors, Ray, who continue to support Ray and Dregs, make the podcast possible. As always, thank you to Tim Hortons, and thank you to Acon. This has been your trade deadline edition of the Ray and Dregs Hockey Podcast. Until early next week, stay safe, everybody.